All right, welcome back. This is Microeconomics, Chapter 10, and we're going to be discussing monopolistic competition and mostly oligopoly. Uh, if you want to pull out the notes that I provided after you've read the chapter, kind of look through the notes, we'll get started. Okay. Section 10.1, Monopolistic Competition. This is where we get away from sort of the pure models, right? We have a pure model of competition where you have a price taker, and that's a sort of perfect competition market. You have a pure monopoly market on the other end of the spectrum. So you got pure competition, pure monopoly. You got price taker, and you got price giver, right? Here we're starting to approach the middle ground a little bit, and we're adding a little nuance to the models. Okay. So monopolistic competition is the idea that you have a competitive market, but there are so many product differentiations in the market that in some sense each firm has a monopoly over their market, right? So think about fashion retail. Fashion retail, yes, you have lots and lots of different fashion retail outlets in the mall, say, if anyone is allowed to go to the mall these days. You've got, what are some fashion retail stores? 579, Abercrombie. Clearly fashion isn't really my thing. I'm guessing y'all have noticed. But the idea here is that, yes, you have lots and lots of different producers, but each one of them has this distinct variation on their product. So in some sense, there's more monopolistic tendencies in the theoretical modeling under these conditions, right? Because especially in the higher end, right? Higher end of, say, the fashion world, where we're talking about a Calvin Klein or something that the president is wearing at the inauguration, or these sort of high end fashion designers. They're yes, they are in fashion, and yes, they do have competitors, but their pieces are so idiosyncratic that they can sort of charge whatever they want, right? So they break out of the competition of the other firms, because in some sense they are a firm, they are a market unto themselves. Okay? So we're really not going to talk a whole lot about that. You should understand the concept of monopolistic competition, but we're really going to try to focus on oligopolies in this chapter. So moving on to oligopolies, and these are a lot more common in the market. The market is very rarely purely monopolistic, right? Other than, say, national security, nuclear armaments, that sort of thing. And it's also pretty rarely purely profit. Purely market driven, pure competition. For these sorts of things, it would be like farming. Agricultural products, raw materials, especially, except when you start to talk about the higher end stuff like the raw earth materials and diamonds and these sorts of things. So, in general, the more likely you are going to find things like unrealistic competition in the market, or you're going to find oligopoly, where you have only a handful of firms providing some sort of product. So like we talked about chip makers in one of the last chapters, when we're talking about these high-end circuitry boards and microchips. This is an oligopoly. There's only really three firms on the planet that can even do it. And so this is the idea. And there are two ways that oligopolies can go. They can decide to be competitive with each other, which is really good for the consumer, and really good for product development and research, and rolling profits back into the firms and these sorts of things. Or they can go the other way, and they can collude instead of compete. And if they collude, it acts a lot more like a monopoly. And it's really bad for consumers. It's bad for future development. It's bad for research. So we'll talk about the pressures that can push them in one direction or another. Ba, 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 ba. Let's see. Let's move down to figure 10.4. And these are monopolistic. Actually, let's go up to the simple one first. Figure 10.2. And this just wants to show you the differences in the demand curves and how price can affect output in the different theoretical markets, right? So the first one where you have a perfect competitor, all producers are price takers, period. No matter how much more you produce, you have to take the price that the market gives. It's $4.33 for a pound of raspberries or whatever it is, and it moves every day and it shifts, a pound of cattle or, whatever sort of agricultural material you can enter here. The second one is the monopoly, right? And this is going to be probably nuclear weapons. This is going to be diamond producers, right? Where they want to manipulate the demand curve through pricing, and they want to limit the supply, limit the quantity, so that they can drive up the price, and will drive up their own profits, right? And the third piece, the figure 10.2c, is the monopolistic competitor. This is more like the oligopoly sort of thing. There's a strong mixture between the two, right? The more that you start to produce and you start to flood the market and you actually make the market competitive, the less than you can affect demand, right? And so they just want to sort of show you how these things operate in the different theoretical realms. Okay, so then we'll move on down to 10.4. This looks really complicated, but all they want to show you is how this monopolistic competition affects prices and quantity outputs and these sorts of things. They want to just show you that in these markets, if there is a profit to be made, other companies are going to flood in, right? That's just how the market works. And that's natural, and we want that to happen. We want net profits to eventually balance out at zero or, positive but close to zero, because that means that there's equilibrium in the market. That means that the producers are making a little bit of profit, but the consumers aren't really being, they aren't being gouged. And so eventually you always want firms to enter or leave the market. You want them to enter if there's a lot of profit in the market, and it'll drive down that profit back to zero because of the competition that's entering the market, and the prices are being driven down a little bit because they have to compete. And so that's the movement from Q0 to Q1 will bring the price from P0 to P1 at that point Y. That's all they're trying to show you, right? Is that if you do have profit, other firms will enter the market to compete with you and drive down prices, and your profit will eventually equilibrate to zero. Okay. If there is no profit or even loss in the market because too many firms entered, the B here, the B graph shows you that, okay, now you're going to have people exit or firms exit the market. It will equilibrate back to a $0 profit for firms, right? So it's just, all we're doing is, if there's profit in the market, new firms are entering, and it's pulling it back down to the equilibrated zero profit point. If we're losing, firms are going to leave, and it'll pull it back up to the equilibrated zero profit point. All right, let's move on. Bum, 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 bum. Oligopolies. All right, like we talked about earlier, there are two possibilities here. You have, say, a theoretical 2 to 6 firms or whatever it is in the market. It's very few firms. There's so few firms in the market that if they decided to collude, they could limit the supply and charge whatever price they wanted to, just like in the sort of monopoly theoretical model. If they decide to compete, they can drive down the price so that it would be fair for consumers, and everyone is having to compete. And that in the long run is good because it drives down prices, it drives up research, it drives up investment back into the firm, these sorts of things. Monopoly is never good for anyone, especially for the consumer, right? You should know the word cartel. Cartel is a formal agreement to collude. You don't see this a whole lot, right? No one wants to just openly admit, like, yeah, we're a mob. We're trying to steal and limit supply and screw our customers. Like, no one's going to agree to that. At least not out loud, right? They're not going to sign any paperwork. But there is one really famous cartel that exists on paper, the OPEC, the Oil Producing Economic Consortium. This is like Saudi Arabia and who are the major members? You have Russia, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela. It's not a very nice list to be on, by the way. Kuwait, Iraq. I think Turkey's a member. So you have all of these states saying, okay, we have literally signed paperwork to agree that we are going to limit our production in oil so that we can drive up the costs and we can maximize our profit, right? And so OPEC is one of the only cartels, open cartels on the planet. There are some real problems with cartels and collusion, right? The problem is everyone has an incentive to cheat. You have the incentive to cheat your partner, right? You all agree to sell diamonds at, 1,000 units for $1,000, but you have an incentive to sort of try and sneak around your cartel or your collusive partners and put out an extra 200 diamonds without anyone really knowing about it, right? And now you're driving down the cost and you're maximizing your profit, but you're kind of screwing all your partners in your collusive oligopoly. And then they start watching you and they start sneaking diamonds onto the market. And now everybody's in the same boat they would have been in before, right? And they're all competing. And so oligopolies are a real pain in the butt. They very rarely work long term because the partners in the decision to try to limit supply have such a strong incentive to dump extra goods on the market so that they can take advantage of that high price, right? And so you get this prisoner's dilemma. And the prisoner's dilemma is described here at the bottom. But you should take some time and maybe watch another video on prisoner's dilemma, or just take some real time and read up on this prisoner's dilemma and make sure you understand it, because this is one of the most important concepts in economics and in social sciences, this and the tragedy of the commons, right? And so the prisoner's dilemma is the idea that, okay, well, I'm going to turn it into the firm's dilemma, the oligopolist dilemma. You have two firms who produce, we're going to call it diamonds, okay? And they get together and they agree, we're going to sell 1,000 diamonds at $1,000 a piece, right? And they agree to it. But one firm has an incentive to cheat and dump a whole lot of extra diamonds on the market. And if that happens, that firm that cheated will get a huge boon. And the firm that didn't cheat will lose out. It'll be way worse than even if they competed in a regular market. And so this is the problem, right? They both have this incentive where, say, I get 1,500 instead of us both getting 1,000. Now I get 1,500 because I cheated, and you only get 200 because you followed the rules and I screwed you. And the same goes for him. But if we both cheat, it makes the whole market competitive, and it brings that profit equilibrium back to zero, and you get a naturalized market. And so the incentive, no matter what happens here, is that you cheat, right? It is really the only true option that you can take. And if you don't cheat, you're a sucker. And your CEO is a sucker. And so this is the problem with oligopolies, is that eventually they start to break down, and there's a whole lot of frustration, and there's a whole lot of anxiety, and there's even like spying on the other companies to make sure that they're following the rules. And so now you're wasting all of these resources that you could have been putting into your firm trying to like spy and make sure that there's no cheating in the system. And so Russia is watching, Iran is watching, Turkey is watching, Saudi Arabia is sending agents to Venezuela to try and figure out how many barrels of oil they're producing. And there are cheaters all the time. Nigeria cheats constantly. They don't care. So this is a real problem. And generally, these sorts of things really fall apart, especially in the medium to long term, right? They might work for a little while, but then everybody recognizes, wait, we could just screw our partners and we could be the big king winner, And so it always tends to fall apart. So be careful about these things. Plus, you can go to prison for doing any of these things, according to both international and American law. So, don't get involved, but we do need to understand how the concepts work and how the theoretical behaviors of the different firms work in an oligopoly. So, we've got an exam coming up this week. I will post a little video on what you should be studying. There will be a little bit more written stuff on this exam. So it'll probably be a mix of multiple choice and then some short answer stuff. So I will post a little video at the beginning of next week when I post the exam. You will probably have another week to do it just like you did last time. And then I will also post a little thing on what you should be studying up for. I hope to get that up today or this weekend. So I hope everyone is doing well. I hope you all survived the winter storm. And I hope you're happy and healthy. So have a great day, and I'll see you soon.